You're listening to Trek FM.
Welcome, dear listeners, to From There to Here, where we start from the beginning with Enterprise, and we go all year, all the way to the end with Beyond. We invite you to join us today. My name is Caitlin, and with me is Mike. Mike, how are you doing today?
I'm doing okay. How are you?
I'm doing all right. I'm excited to talk about Star Trek. My heart is beating a little quickly because I'm happy to be on air.
So we've got 2 episodes today.
Yes.
Year of Hell Part 2, and you are cordially invited.
Yes. So we are continuing off where we left off yesterday. Janeway has announced that she's breaking up the family of Voyager, and everyone gets scattered to the 4 winds of the Delta Quadrant, essentially. You see the core crew, they've split up. The bridge crew have allied themselves with other species who are teaming up against Kurtwood Smith, who's the time traveler bent on restoring his perfect universe where his wife is alive. The time travelers have even captured Chakotay and Paris in the first part, and they have an inside look at the time travelers' crew. But it all ends in a blaze of glory as Janeway realizes that the only way to defeat the time travelers is to ram the nearly destroyed Voyager already into the time ship with all the chrono shields down, and the episode ends in a reset button. So, Mike, what did you think about this episode?
You know, I mentioned yesterday that I have kind of a love-hate episode or relationship with this episode, as I think most people do.
Yes.
You know, my opinion is definitely not outside of the box when I say I love this episode. I think it's like the best thing that Voyager has done, and yet the reset button at the end kind of ruins it. That's the stance that I've taken for like the past, 10, 15 years or whatever. But watching it this time, I definitely had a different reaction to it, which kind of collapses that opinion at both ends. For one thing, like I was saying yesterday, I don't think that this is the best episode of Voyager. I think maybe I like the idea of this episode the best, but it's not as good as a lot of the standalone episodes. I mean, Living Witness, for example, is awesome. Way better, way more to think about. And, like coming out of that episode, you're left with sort of like a moral question or whatever that you have in your head. Whereas coming out of Year of Hell, what you're left with is, that's a cool idea for a show, but it's not really like the morality or life lessons or whatever you want to call them at play in this episode are gonna like leave you thinking for days and days. At least that's not the case for me, but I still do think it's very good. However, on the flip side, the problem that I always had with it, and the thing that always sort of like, it was always like, yeah, but, and the but was the reset button. Watching it this time, I didn't have nearly as much of a problem with the reset button as I have in the past, because it's built in from the beginning. I mean, it really is. They started off with, him messing with time, so it makes sense that, time is going to be something which is going to be altered in one way or another. And they didn't just pull it, out of their butts at the end of the episode or anything like that. It was built in from the very first scene. And because of that, I'm okay with them hitting the reset button on this one. It doesn't bother me at all. And I think maybe the frustration that I had back in the day, and the frustration that a lot of people have, is not so much that they hit the reset button. It's more that they wanted to see this show, and by hitting the reset button, there is no more show like this, And that's kind of not fair to the episode. Although I understand that philosophy as well. So in some ways, I don't like this episode nearly as much as I used to, but I also don't think that the fatal flaw is a fatal flaw, if that makes any sense.
Oh, no, that makes total sense. I am more willing to forgive this episode's reset button for not exactly the same reason. It's more like it's Voyager, so it's hard for me to be so critical. When I first got into the show, I seriously thought it could do no wrong. But now that I'm more removed and into other shows as well, I have started to look at it more critically. And at first, the reset button bothered me a lot. I wanted to see the concept expanded, but I knew that they probably wouldn't have been able to end it any way other than the reset button, so you would have gotten angry at all this character development that happened and got erased. I like your point that it's from the beginning, the time has already been messed with, so obviously things need to get restored. It's interesting watching this show again after getting into Doctor Who, where the whole concept of time travel is only, allowed for certain people who know what they're doing, so things don't end up getting so totally compromised. Maybe if Anorax had some more training, he would have realized, I can't go gallivanting across the Delta Quadrant and literally shred it to bits just for the sake of one person. I need to learn how to move on. But then we wouldn't have this awesome two-parter.
That's true. That's true.
Is there anything else you would like to add now that you've talked about both parts 1 and part 2, Mike?
Not really. It's weird. Like with Scorpion and Year of Hell being sort of the two titans of Voyager, I don't think that either of them really is sort of like deserving of that title, because I think that Voyager's strengths are in its smaller moments. I think that, it does a really good job at presenting like high concept ideas like on a philosophical level. And, while it's certainly known for having its epic, movie scale blockbuster two-parters, I think that that's kind of where the series falters. And those big, massive epics are not, while still good, are not nearly as good as sort of some of the more reflective episodes of the show.
Yes, that totally makes sense, especially given the franchise has a hard time sometimes with two-parters, starting with Best of the Both Worlds and continuing. But I think Year of Hell Part 2 benefits from the fact that it's not a season-ending two-parter, so it doesn't feel as divorced from Part 1.
Yeah.
But I think we should move on to Deep Space Nine. And the first episode in our block from Deep Space Nine is You Are Cordially Invited, aka the one where Jadzia and Worf finally get married. This is an interesting setup. It was, to be honest, the first time that I've seen this episode. I am aware of the dynamics of the relationship, but I haven't seen the whole story played out. So, during wartime, the Klingons are helping out with the Federation fighting the Dominion, and the episode opens with Alexander joining Jadzia and Worf, and they're having a little family catch-up time. And Alexander mentions that he is being assigned to a new ship, meaning he will be soon going off to war again, and that causes Jadzia and Worf to agree to push up their wedding so that Alexander can take part. However, it's a cross-cultural marriage, and Jadzia has to prove herself worthy to join the House of Martok. And as Mike said in his summaries yesterday, hijinks ensue. And in this case, it's family dynamics. Mike, what did you think of this episode? I know Deep Space Nine is more your forte.
Yeah, I like this episode a lot for a lot of reasons. One is that, we're coming off of this massive 6-part arc in DS9, which opened up the season where, the galaxy is thrown into war, and it's heavy and it's dark and a lot of like terrible stuff happens. And having this episode come right after is sort of a nice way to decompress. It's funny, it's lighthearted, it's very, very cliche, for sure. It's the typical wedding episode that you see in every sitcom ever. Oh, they had a fight. The wedding's off. Oh, the wedding's back. But they do it well.
Yes.
It doesn't pretend to be anything that it's not. And it is great how it does advance this, relationship, which we've seen build up over the past couple of years. And I think that's pretty great. And yeah, I think it's funny. I mean, Nog's dance is the best thing ever. And on a sort of like a personal note, this episode holds a special place in my heart because the tale of the two Klingon hearts, which they say during the ceremony, that speech was what my wife and I used for our reading during our wedding. So there's that little personal connection too. But yeah, I like this episode a lot. I think it's a lot of fun. What did you think about it?
I enjoyed it. I'm pretty familiar with the Deep Space Nine characters. I just haven't had the time to sit down and watch it from point A to point B. So I was unsure of what would happen to allow Martok's wife to concede and allow Jadzia into the House of Martok. I was kind of surprised that it developed into the traditional wedding episode where Jadzia has to make concessions. I was hoping for something a little bit different, but the wedding ceremony at the end of the episode was a reward enough, and I really liked Jadzia's dress. I know fandom has talked about how awesome that costume is, but it was just refreshing to watch the episode for myself and see it, in its context. And yes, fandom is right. That is a really awesome dress.
Yeah, it is pretty cool. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's a good episode, and I think it's definitely something like season 6 of Deep Space Nine is extremely heavy, extremely dark. I mean, we haven't even gotten to the darkest stuff yet, and to have something like this, and there's a few of them throughout the season, to just kind of break that up, I think is really, really good, and it works really well for sure.
Yes, prior to getting on recording with you, Mike, I did sample some of the most recent From There to Here, and this is the one that was released a couple of days ago, was In the Cards, and it was described exactly the same thing, a story where heaviness happened before, and this is lightness, but it's done well, and it feels like a palate cleanser. So this episode, the bachelorette party alone was a great palate cleanser.
Yeah, and In the Cards is really like the last episode before they started that whole arc, and then they did 7 episodes, and then this is the one right after it. So to have those two sort of bookends in the Cards and You Are Cordially Invited is really nice. So yeah.
One of these days, I'll just carve out some time where I just do a Deep Space Nine episode a night, and then finally all the pieces will get to come together. I've seen the highlights, but I'm missing half the meal, not knowing the full context.
Yeah, there's a lot of really good standalone episodes of DS9 as well, but yeah, definitely. I'm jealous of you getting to see these episodes for the first time. Yeah.
All right. Well, tune in tomorrow. I almost said next week, but I'm so used to weekly podcasting. So tune in tomorrow, listeners. Next up on the docket is another Deep Space Nine episode, Resurrection, and then another Voyager, Random Thoughts. Mike, where are you often online? Where can listeners get in touch with you?
You can find me on Twitter at Mumbles3K, and you can also find me right here on the network doing Stage 9, where we talk about the people who make Star Trek. What about you, Caitlin?
And I'm also on Twitter. My handle is Walsh Caitlin, and I have been trying to get involved in the Babel conference, so if you see anyone on Facebook as Caitlin Walsh, that is probably me. Alright, listeners, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you tomorrow for more Voyager and Deep Space Nine.